Thank you. I will be very brief. I know you're not here to see me prattle on, and I'm interested to hear about the restoration as well. But just a couple of words. So I've been tasked to try to explain why are we talking about F-16 at a conference that is purportedly focusing on the Vietnam War. Well, I assume that most of you are like me and that we don't need an excuse to talk about the F-16. The F-16 is awesome. Let's just talk about it. But there is an important connection to be made to Vietnam. So I want to talk about how we go from something like an F-4 Phantom to an F-16. What is this connection? And there's quite a lot of reasons why, as early as 1964, the Air Force really wanted to pursue a new type of fighter aircraft that could focus on the air-to-air air superiority mission. One of those is the Vietnam War itself. The perception that the air-to-air combat that was happening in Vietnam, that the Air Force and the Navy to a large degree, was not performing nearly as well as they expected to be.
Particularly the Air Force.
Particularly the Air Force, exactly. And this is a combination of a lot of things. It has to do with training, it has to do with technology, it has to do with missiles, it has to do with the aircraft and what those aircraft were designed to do and what they were not designed to do in terms of speed versus maneuverability and things like that. And a gun is part of it. And you can see all of these things in interviews at the time. You see them in the Red Baron reports. You see them in pilot after action reports, people talking about, we don't feel like, this is not a knock against the F-4 Phantom. I love the F-4 Phantom. But as good as the F-4 Phantom was, it was struggling a little bit to dominate the air-to-air space against a MiG-17 and a MiG-21, particularly in horizontal maneuvering. And so there's that perception. So there's a coterie of people assembling in the Air Force in kind of middle management and into some leadership roles that are really saying, we need a new aircraft that can focus on this air-to-air role.
They called them the fighter mafia.
They started calling themselves that. I will get to the fighter mafia in a minute, but it's not just this. There's also more of these fighter pilots are into leadership positions, and part of that is because of the Korean War. There's a lot larger role for fighter pilots as opposed to bomber pilots. So, and into the Vietnam War, that continued to be the case. So more fighter and attack pilots were in the promotion pipeline, getting into leadership positions, which gives them a larger kind of say in decision making. There's a lot of people, and I've got some names here: Arthur Agin, Glenn Kent, Otto Glasser, Larry Welch. These are just some of the names of people that were really pushing for this focus on air-to-air, and they are putting studies together, they're putting panels together, they're making recommendations to the Air Force to do this. There's also a lot of worry. In 1967, there's an air show in the Soviet Union where the MiG-25 is revealed for the first time, and this really frightened a lot of people, especially in Air Force leadership, thinking about, do we have anything in our pipeline that can really take on the MiG-25? And there was some worries about that. There was also the fact that the Air Force bought the A-7 Corsair around this time, which was more of an air-to-ground platform, so there was a sense that we don't have an air-to-air specialty aircraft. So all of these things having to do with the Vietnam War are pushing for, in 64 into 65, we need to get a new air-to-air program off and running. That was the FX program, stands for Fighter Experimental. There's a lot of debate internally about what that program is supposed to be. Is it air-to-air versus multi-role? There's different camps forming within the Air Force. I'm summing up a lot of history here. That program went on throughout 65. In late 66, John Boyd enters the program, and he had developed what he calls energy maneuverability theory, which was a way to mathematically describe maneuverability of fighter aircraft. And so he was using that to evaluate aircraft designs and predict how well they might perform in air-to-air maneuvering. He has a lot of friends. I've got some names here: William Ritchie, Pierre Spray, Tom Christie, Robert Titus. These guys are working on this, trying to push the FX to be as focused on air-to-air as possible, which not everybody wanted, but he's pushing for that really hard. And this program ends up being the F-15 Eagle, which, as we all know, is a great airplane. Love the F-15. It's very effective in the air-to-air role. But this is not the airplane that Boyd and his friends really wanted. They wanted it to be much smaller. They wanted it to be lighter weight. They wanted it to be even more focused on the air-to-air mission. And so you can see Myers has this quote about they didn't even like to be associated with the F-15. They wanted to do something else. And so they started working on something else, and that became what they originally called the FXX or the FX2, which is later going to be called the lightweight fighter or the LWF. And so there's all these kind of pitches. I have some sketches here of different designs they were come up with. This is where they start calling themselves the fighter mafia, and they're having like secret, semi-illegal meetings with contractors to design these aircraft. Eventually, what happens is the new Deputy SecDef, Packard, wants to return the DoD to a prototyping system. And so there's many different programs that are selected for prototyping, and this lightweight fighter becomes one of them. The idea was not that they would put a new fighter into production. The idea was we're going to develop 2 prototypes of 2 different designs. There'll be technology demonstrators just so that we can test out a bunch of different tech, see what's working, and maybe apply that to new systems maybe in the future.
In the lower right-hand corner, it says the original RFP said these were going to be just technology demonstrators.
Mm-hmm.
There's no promise to buy a bunch of them.
Right.
Larry, the group that you're talking about, the main leader, the noisy one, who was Chuck Spinney, have you heard that name?
Oh, yeah.
Okay,
Oh, yeah.
so Chuck Spinney took the briefing to Dixon
Mm-hmm.
at TAC, and Dixon threw all his slides on the floor out in the hall.
I believe that.
They met at the Fort Myers Officers Club in the basement. I used to go to their meetings
Mm-hmm.
in the basement, in the Rathskeller type place, and they get people from the Armed Services Committee. They had their ear, and the colonels in the Pentagon were told, "Don't talk to these guys, otherwise we'll make you go fly a C-130." True.
Yeah, there's a lot of those kinds of stories. I've got a whole book about this where I get into some of them, which is interesting. I'm summing up a lot of stuff here. I don't want to get too in the weeds, but yeah, this is really fascinating. The personalities involved in this are really cantankerous.
What's the name of your book?
It's called Flying Camelot.
Flying Camelot.
Yeah. So when the RFP goes out, you get a lot of interesting responses. So you've got Northrop's and General Dynamics are the 2 that, spoiler alert, will be selected. But the other design is really interesting too. You've got the Lockheed Lancer, LTV had an entry, Boeing even had an entry that kind of looks like an F-16, but it's very different. So I thought that was really interesting. The 2 that are ending up selected are the Northrop and the General Dynamics one. Again, supposed to be technology demonstrators. Flight test begins on the YF-16 and the YF-17. If the YF-17 looks familiar to you, it's because it was the basis for later what becomes the F-18. So halfway through the flight test program, Secretary of Defense Schlesinger announces a surprise announcement. Guys, I've changed my mind. This is no longer a technology demonstrator program. This is a fly-off competition. One of these will be selected to go into full production. The details on why that happened is completely different depending on who you ask. I've heard 3 very different versions of that story. It involves a deal between Schlesinger and the Chief of Staff of the Air Force about expanding the number of wings in the Air Force to include a certain number of lightweight fighters. Exactly what those numbers were and exactly who was involved in that conversation
45
is...
40.
Yeah, well, I've got 3 different versions of the story, and I don't know exactly what happened in these conversations. But yeah, it's something like that. That they were going to expand the size of the Air Force if he would agree to take some lightweight fighters, which they do. So that's how we go to the YF-16 being selected for production. Now, when it goes to production, the YF-16 prototype and the production model F-16A are quite different. You can see them together here. They are, the production model is a little bit bigger. There's a lot of reasons why there were different capabilities added to it. And the fighter mafia guys like Boyd and Spinney and these folks really did not like the changes made to the production model. You can see here some of the changes. It's about 1,000 pounds heavier. It was changed from being air-to-air only to being a multi-role fighter. There's a larger radar and avionics package put in. It's made night capable. It's made nuclear capable at one point. It's just bigger. And you can see here's the lineup of the prototypes there on the far left and then the production models here on the right. And you can see the difference. The fact that there's bombs on it at all would probably send Boyd into a conniption fit.
No, any pilot.
Yeah, any pilot. This cartoon is one of my favorite things that I found. This is from a General Dynamics presentation where they were pushing back against this, and so you can see kind of the idea that many pilots had, that the prototype was the ideal, what they wanted, and then the production model is this kind of change. And these quotes, all of these quotes are from some of these fighter mafia folks, that the production model is a mutilation of the character of the lightweight fighter, and they were calling for all these changes to be made.
ACF means Air Combat Fighter.
Yeah.
That was what they were calling the productionized version.
Yeah. So the reason why I think it's important to look at the YF-16 that you guys are restoring is because it has this kind of unique place in the culture of, that's the closest that this fighter advocate group got to what they really, really wanted. In fact, the test pilot, Phil Ostricher, called it the Camelot of aeronautical engineering. That's why my book has that title. And specifically talking about the YF-16 prototype was the ideal to him of what a fighter should be, and that's why it has this kind of unique place in history. So I am eager to hear about the restoration of this aircraft, and I will turn it over to Kevin and Ben, so please welcome them up.
We're going to shift gears here in the presentation. So we've had this airplane for several years now, and we're going to talk about what it was when we got it and what we're doing with it. I'd love to tell you that it looks like that right now. It doesn't quite. We're on our way to that. That's the May 1975 version of the paint job. That's kind of our target for what we're going to make it back into. Two prototypes built, and they are a little bit different because of what Mike just talked about, where they changed gears from being a demonstrator to being an operational class aircraft. Number one rolled out in the red, white, and blue paint job in December of 1973. Amazing part is that first airplane was built from the time the contract was let to that rollout in 21 months. Really a fast turn program. That part Boyd and everybody were on board with, that it was a small enough thing to do that. Number one is the one that did the famous Flight 0, where it took off before they wanted it to. It was using an F-15 engine, and everybody forgot to check ground idle. And the deal was Phil was doing a quick high-speed taxi to just pull up the nose and put it back down, and discovered it wouldn't stop. It kept accelerating because the ground idle was higher than the weight of the airplane, basically. That airplane went on to fly as the CCV airplane. But the thing about that by the way, now it is at the Virginia Air and Space Museum at Hampton Roads. That airplane did not have any weapons capability. You could hang tanks on it for aerodynamic reasons. It was used for all the aerodynamic testing and pilot flight handling qualities evaluations. Number two, they took a little break in there when that announcement happened. They stretched the build of the second one out by 2 months so they could finish all the wiring and plumbing in the wings and fuselage. So anytime you see a YF-16 dropping weapons, it's number two, because number one was not capable of it. Also, number two could use fuel from the pylon, from the external tanks. Number two also has a gun. Number one does not. Other things, so they went out and shot the Dart with that. We'll talk about where it's at. Here we are today at the Fort Worth Aviation Museum. When it rolled out, it had the sky blue and cloud camo job. This is the same era when they were painting F-15s baby blue. They thought that was going to be a great air-to-air camo. Turned out not to be very good. If you were looking up at it, it was okay. If you were looking down at all with a dark background, the contrast was even higher than a standard camo paint job. That paint job only lasted about a month. Phil Ostricher, our chief test pilot for the YF-16, just nicest guy you could ever meet. If you met Phil away from flying, you might think he was an insurance salesman or something. That's how his son describes him. I also knew Phil from a little airport. He had a 65-horse Aranca Defender as his weekend flying airplane, and an F-16 is his Monday through Friday flying airplane. So that's about as far apart as you can get. Number two, here's where it joined the program. May of 1974, so next year is its 50th birthday. That's kind of our target, to have this airplane fully restored, back online, sitting outside, so its 50th birthday. You can see the plot here. These are the number of flights or flying hours. Number one is in red, the green is the total. You see, as soon as number two got out there, it started catching up, because it was tasked to do a lot of the work. One of the other things you'll always see on the tail flash, number 1 airplane says YF-16. Number 2 says F-16. They viewed this as a pre-production, this is very close to what we want to go do for the ACF program. So we always have this debate about how to paint the tails, but all the pictures of number 2, it always just says F-16. And we have the list of flags here. Those were the original countries that signed up. That was the big deal at the Paris Air Show. In addition to the Air Force saying they were going to buy some of these, there were about 600 that were online for the Europeans and all the international community. And that's gone on. There are 23 different countries that have bought the F-16. So it's been a great success in that standpoint. I mentioned that the blue and white paint job didn't last long. They took some time out of their busy flying schedule to roll it into the Edwards paint barn and just shot it with Compass Ghost Gray all over one color. And let's go back to flying. Number 2 also had a small radar. It had a gun ranging radar. It really wasn't what you think of as a radar today. It was more like just it was feeding the HUD range data for the gun system. But the airplane got busy real quick. 4th flight, it went out to Mach 1.9. Did a lot of the gun firing, missile firing, fired the missile supersonic. Both tip stations were active on this one. You can see the dart being dragged by an F4, and it was actually a very accurate platform. They had one little mistake with the fly-by-wire system. With the gun off center, there's a rudder kicker that makes up for the reaction force of the gun. Well, somebody missed a sign. The first time they squeezed the trigger, the nose went way hard the other way. That got fixed real quick. That airplane, they put in over 200 hours on that airplane in only 9 months. It was flying every other day, literally, 171 sorties in 9 months. So it was a busy little airplane. This is the same airplane that also had the gear up landing. Neil Anderson was the test pilot. This was getting ready to go to the Paris Air Show. They'd been doing the practice at Carswell. They decided to invite all the employees and their family to see this thing. So there's 25,000 people on our side of the flight line, plus Air Force people over on the Carswell side. The day before this incident, the crew chief on the line had called up to engineering, and Travis Putman, the guy that designed the landing gear, got called to come down to look at something. There was a tire mark on the center keel of the airplane. The tire's not supposed to touch the center keel. And one of the switches for the uplock was bent. And Travis, they got things sorted and had it up on jacks and swung the gear, and everything looked nominal. But he was watching the video of Neil's air show. And what Neil would do, as soon as he got off the ground, he'd suck up the gear while he's still in ground effect, accelerate to 300 knots, and start doing rolls while the gear was cycling still. And the landing gear actually kind of rolls over on an F-16 as it goes into the well. And the tires were still spinning. And the gyroscopic force took it right past the uplock switch and jammed it against the center keel. Of course, Neil goes and finishes the air show, and now he's overhead the base with 900 pounds of gas left.
Yeah.
And they try everything they can do. They try shaking the airplane, they try pulling G's, trying to cycle the gear. It's not coming down. And they start thinking about, can we get a tanker? And Carswell's right across there. All their tankers are on war overload.
No, 900, no.
So there's a tanker out of the burn pit pumping gas offboard to get lightweight enough to fly in peacetime. It wouldn't have made any difference. He slid it into the grass, and Neil said as he flared to land, he snapped the throttle to idle cutoff and put that hand on the D-ring because nobody knew if the airplane was going to go turtle. He would have been fine, except out in the grass out there was a little hump. And the airplane hit that, and you can see in slow motion the fuselage flexing. And it plops back down in the grass, slides to a stop. Now, by now, he is completely out of gas. But he jumps out and runs because he thinks it might burn. There's no gas left. It's not going to burn. In the longer version, here's Neil running away, and he looks back at it and throws his helmet on the ground just in time for the really big fire truck with the 8-foot wheels to run over it. So he had that helmet on the wall of his office for the rest of his career. his nice air show painted helmet. Good news is they brought the airplane back into the shop and in 6 weeks had it flying again. Basically, it had sprung a bunch of rivets at one of the fasteners, one of the bulkheads, and we actually found where that is. We've got pictures of where they put doublers in and where they reinforced things, so we've documented the repairs that were made. The problem was, number one was out at Edwards. They had to bring it back. Remember, number one doesn't have the ability to use the external tanks. So it basically had to go all the way to Paris, following a tanker very closely. Also, number two had the HF radio and all the navigation gear. Number one was strictly outfitted for testing, so they really quickly had to swap boxes into number one so we could go to the air show, which it did, and it was a happy day. One of the other things number two did, so this airplane has a long and varied history. As part of the debates with the F-15, F-16 community, the Air Force said F-16 will not carry BVR missiles. That's the F-15's job. You guys are the close-in fighter. Don't play with this. Don't ask us to do this officially. Well, GD said, we're going to do it anyway. We're going to figure out how to hang AIM-7s on the jet. And what they did was they modified the landing gear doors to carry an AIM-7 on each side. You can see it in the open position. The doors got very thick, and there's a little doubler right in front of the door here. Kind of a fiberglass fairing because the doors were thicker. That's a really beefy landing gear door because that's a 500-pound missile on a 9G airplane. So they built that up. They could also carry them on the pylons here. We didn't have a radar that could guide AIM-7s, but they went out to China Lake and on GD money, including paying for the missile, fired one just to prove it would separate. Now they forgot to check what mode the missile was in if you don't have a radar to guide it. And the thing that AIM-7 will do is pitch up and go for maximum distance. And it left the China Lake range and wound up out in the Sierra Nevada mountains somewhere. But it did work. When we got the jet, the landing gear doors were gone. We did not get those with the jet. The lab just put sheet metal over it. Also, the hinges on the landing gear doors, every other F-16 except this one has 3 hinge points on the doors. Ours has 5, and they're big chunks of steel that we didn't have any way to modify. So when we made the new doors to go on this one, we had to make it match the hinges that were already on here. So it's kind of a one-off deal. Luckily, we're never going to cycle the gear. They may not close perfectly, but they do fit on the jet. Last time this airplane flew was in 1979. The airplane was really designed to only fly about 300 hours. They kept using it for 900 hours. This was the airplane that a whole lot of Air Force guys got to fly for the first time. It also was being used as a chase plane as we did the initial batch of full-scale development F-16s. So he was up on a chase mission in August of 1979, and when Phil came back to land, once again, Phil Ostracker was flying this one, the gear would not come down, the nose gear would not come down and lock. And we've, once again, found the damage. Where the downlock actuator fits, it had broken the tang on the bulkhead. So the actuator couldn't push it all the way into the locked position. Once again, they tried everything. They shook it, they bounced it on the landing gear. You can see in this picture here, the nose gear is kind of back at an angle. It's not fully locked. Phil got it on the ground, held the nose up, aero braked it as long as he could, and eventually just kind of fell through, and here's where we lost the radome. And it also made contact with the bottom of the inlet. Okay, by now we had 8 or 10 F-16s on the flight line. This one was really no longer needed. There was no point in repairing it. It was wrapped in plastic. They defueled it and took all the volatiles out of it, wrapped it in plastic and set it in a hangar. And the Air Force said, okay, send that one to Rome, New York, Griffiths Air Force Base. It's going to become our test mule for electronics. There's what it looked like when it got there. The lab guys, to make it look more like a production airplane, the production F-16 is 10 inches longer than the prototype. And you can see a silver stripe right here where they did the sheet metal work. Also, they grafted on a production radome and radar nose, this is the radar bulkhead. The top side of the F-16 and YF-16 contours are identical. The bottom side, you can see a big sheet metal patch here where they just kind of fared that in, worked sheet metal around it, actually hung a radar on the bulkhead and put it up on a pole.
Did they ever repair the damage from that accident, or was that just when they straight up replaced the nose with the?
The chin inlet, they just wrapped some sheet metal around it that really wasn't too well done. It just covered the hole, it covered the skid mark. I'll show you the repair that we've made since then. This airplane was on that pole from 1980 till 2018. Upside down, right side up, they had ways to turn it back and forth. Every combination of stores that's ever flown on an F-16 has been tested on here, because what they're measuring is how do all the antennas behave? Do we have a blind spot over here when you have an ALQ 131 pod on this side? When you have 370 tanks or 600-gallon tanks, or does that change the way the UHF radio is received? So every antenna, every pod, every store combination ever flown on an F-16 has been through testing on this airplane. The only reason they quit testing in 2018 is we were reaching the end of the production run on the F-16. And the other thing that you'll see in a minute here, it spent a lot of its life upside down, because they can turn it this way, and it's like looking at the airplane from the ground, if it's up here. So they tested it upside down. They had brackets on the side of the fuselage here that could do it either way. But it was very useful. I mean, it was a test that needed to be done. On F-35, we built a full-scale fiberglass mock-up of the airplane that's on the roof of one of our buildings that does the same job. It was a purpose-built thing. They didn't do that here. They had, here's a nice airframe we can start with. So the next part of this is, how did it get from Rome, New York, back to Fort Worth to its original home? And I'm going to let Ben Guttery and Sarah talk to you a little bit about how we got there.
Thanks, Kevin. I'm Ben Guttery. I'm the collections manager at the Fort Worth Aviation Museum. And this is not the ideal transfer and acquisition. And the good news is Sarah still speaks to me. So that's a really nice thing. What we did is we found people that worked in the program to try to ask them, is this airframe available, and what might your future be with it? Because we had been in the market looking for an F-16. There was a lot of discussion about a decade ago at the museum as whether or not to acquire an F-16, and there was a group that said, that airplane's not old, they're still making them. But this airplane is old, it's pushing 50 years. And so we were delighted to hear that the radar range had kind of set it aside and put it in retirement, as they had gotten another F-16 airframe. Sometimes our volunteers and directors get pretty excited when they find something, an opportunity, if you will, and they get a little crazy and call up their political friends. And our U.S. representatives, Kate Ranger, she and the head of the Air Force at the time were great buddies. And so that, it kind of jumped through some things that you really don't want to know about. It's just some ugly sausage making.
What year would that have been?
That would have been 2019.
2019 into 2020.
Yeah. So, I think one of the first things we had to do was let the Air Force see and understand what this aircraft was, because I don't think that was recognized at first. It was just seen as an F-16 airframe. It wasn't just any F-16 airframe. It was the YF-16. And so I think the Air Force came along in several different places and recognized that because it had initially been planned to go to Eglin to have be a target of some kind. And although that was certainly not what we were, I don't think that's what anyone really intended once we realized what the aircraft was. So everybody kind of came on the same page there. It was eventually transferred to us. This is the first loan aircraft we received from the Air Force Museum. It may be the last, but that's okay. We got this one. No, I kid Sarah a lot, just thanking her to still be speaking to me. So,
And I'll
thoughts
just
and
jump in
comments?
here and say, I don't think Fort Worth Aviation Museum has anything to worry about in terms of ever receiving other aircraft from us. That they've been
Is that good?
very good.
Or is
Absolutely. That is very good. They've been wonderful caretakers of this. What usually happens if a museum is interested in a particular aircraft, or if they're just interested in an aircraft in general, they eventually find me. And because I manage the Civilian Museum Loan Program, and so I work with lots of folks who are interested in borrowing aircraft from us. And this is on a loan basis. We call it transfer, that's the, I guess, the administrative action, but it's actually a loan. And so a museum, and this is what Fort Worth did a few years before. They reached out to me. They went through a lot of paperwork, because we're the government, we love our paperwork. And the certification process, that's what it's called, it's a pre-loan certification. And you know, the organization requesting certification kind of gets vetted. That's really what happens.
We had to prove we're a real museum, not
That's
just a
right.
bunch of airplanes parked
That's
outside.
right. And I'll tell you what the goal is to our satisfaction, ensure that, first of all, the museum meets just our basic requirements as per public law, as per our own policies and procedures. And yeah, you know, that they're actually an operational museum and they're not just some shed out on a, you know, back 40 or whatever with some letterhead and a, you know, website. And that is certainly not
Walter
Fort Worth.
Saplata.
Yeah, that's right. And I do get a lot of calls from them. And it is, I mean, I'll be honest with you, it's a bit of an arduous process. There's a couple of folks in this room who've been through it, and they know. But it culminates in a site visit. I come and visit, and I really lay eyes on the operation there, and that's the best part of the visit. I was very happy with what I saw at Fort Worth Aviation Museum when I visited. And so certified they became, and I think they made requests to us for particular airframes. We maintain what we call a master request list. We have a lot of loan accounts. We have 750 plus different military and civilian loan accounts. So we got a lot of people asking us for aircraft. And a lot of people asking us for things that just aren't available yet. They have not come off the active inventory. F-16s are beginning to, some of the older or the earliest models, but they just never seem to come off at the rate that our potential borrowers want them. And we try to be judicious about what we're going to bring into the program. We have 2,900 aircraft in our collection. And I'm trying to remember if that stat is that I think about 2,600 of them are out on loan. So that's a lot of aircraft to manage. I mean, it's just...
Luckily, you have a huge staff.
We're just ginormous, at thousands that work on
Good
it.
question, what percentage of them are deteriorated that you have to pull back?
I'll talk to you about that offline. That's a whole nother briefing.
Yeah.
So yeah, catch me at another time.
Good.
But,
Sorry.
what happens is when an airframe becomes available, we go to our request list. So we go to our request list for F-16s. Whoever's first on that list, and we're going to give a special nod to our military borrowers. They're going to jump right to the top of the list. And I will tell you that Fort Worth Aviation Museum wasn't at the top of the list. They're on there, but they're not at the top. And so, yeah, I guess this was a little bit of an anomaly. The good news is that I think everything came out in the wash just fine. And the good news is that this aircraft has found a wonderful new home, and it is being lovingly cared for and restored, and it's going to be a beautiful asset to Fort Worth and to our loan program too. And it's going to reflect very nicely on the Air Force. All's well that ends well is what I say, and you're on the request list for lots of other things, and so I think that will, I look forward to being able to place more aircraft with you. Please continue.
And thanks. And I think, you know, somebody asked me what did I want to convey at this, and it was really about And, you know, some of, this may be more geared to folks that really haven't gone through the process, but there's a ton of homework to be done. And this was the first picture we got of the YF-16. That should have warned us.
It's not for the faint of heart.
Oh my goodness, it was a mess, and we'll see some more pictures of it. But one of the things we did, we found somebody that actually had ownership on the ground at Rome Labs that spent his entire career working with that airframe. So they were as interested in finding it a new home as we were in acquiring, and that was good. So we have loans of other aircraft from other services, and we really try to let that service know that we're going to give that thing, whatever it is, very good protection and take care of it. You know, we don't want to see stuff go to scrap. There's a lot of stuff that probably should, but that's not what we're in, not the business we're in. It takes an enormous amount of patience because for the longest time we didn't have a clue if we were going to get this aircraft or not. And by the time it finally came around, I think we were ready for it. We have created so many community partners, received additional collections for the museum, like we mentioned Phil Oestreicher. We have all of Phil Oestreicher's papers and other documents from Phil's family.
And his flight suits and his logbooks.
Flight suits, logbooks, neat stuff.
Helmets.
The guy who was the local father of the F-16,
Harry Hilliker.
Harry Hilliker, his family gave us his stuff, and it had not really been looked at up to that point. So we've got 60, 80 boxes of Harry Hilliker collection. So that's what I had to say. I appreciate it.
Ben, tell me, how many other aircraft do you have?
We have about 35 aircraft.
Yeah, so they also have 35 aircraft to take care of too.
So, yeah, we have other
as well as
things,
museum.
and we're expecting several more. We're expecting 2 helicopters from the Marine Corps this week. The Marines had loaned Cavanaugh Flight Museum, which is in Addison, Texas, north of Dallas. Addison is going through a move, and they are trying to downsize as well. So they're moving to another location, and they will be leaving Addison. So we took the opportunity to ask the Marine Corps if we could have the helicopters. Addison was great with it. The guy that is the kind of rehired director at Addison is somebody I've known for 40 years. So it was good to be able to communicate with him. You know, we're not trying to steal any of your stuff. And he said, no, take more. So I know y'all probably still have some stuff.
Yeah, I just got a call from him actually. I might talk to you about it.
Are you at liberty to say what the helicopters are?
Sure. There's a Sea Cobra, and we're Cobra Heaven in Fort Worth. This will be our 4th Cobra, and they're all different.
All different models.
Which is amazing and interesting. The other one is a CH-34. It has a nice Vietnamese, Vietnam War history with the Marine Corps.
Helicopter with a big round motor.
Yeah, so we're real excited to get that. We've got an F-86 that was recently flying F-86 that we're waiting to get moved to the museum, and it's just beautiful. I showed Gary the picture of it last night. Made him smile.
Yep.
So we're always looking for airplanes. The airplanes we were trying to get are those that have local connections. North Texas we promote as being a very important hub for aviation activity, given the number of aircraft that were built there. There are about 70,000, 80,000 airplanes that were built in North Texas since World War II, and about 1 in every 4 or 5 people is somehow employed in the aviation industry in North Texas.
Between
So,
GD, Lockheed, Bell Helicopter, Vought Aircraft.
So long history, lots of history, lots of airplanes. We're still looking to add to the collection that are connected to those entities.
So
See us sometime.
here's what we got. It showed up on a truck. Some assembly required. before they put it up on the pole, the Air Force lab guys had gone through and ripped out all the plumbing and all the wiring and all the hydraulics. It's basically just the structure, because they were trying to minimize how much weight they had to lift up on their pole. It was covered. We talk about our museum. We say we're the most touchable museum in Texas, so I brought a sample. This is what the airplane was covered in. This is electrically loaded rubber and a silver paint on top. If you turn it over, look at the other side. The red paint is the original 1975 air show paint. So we pulled yards and yards of that off the airplane. That was put on the jet to make it a uniform conductive surface for their electronics testing. So they didn't have to worry about, is this rivet causing this anomaly in the UHF signal, or is it the actual shape of the airplane? Other interesting thing about this jet, this shape right here, you can see, is where they were testing the conformal fuel tanks that weren't designed until 2016. So this airplane shape was still right compared to the ones from 2016. They put those two conformal tanks on top. You can see it's still got the production nose on it here. We had about 300 screws to pull that had been rusted in place for 40 years. So it took us a while to work through that. The nose was missing. Luckily, as a pack rat, I had a copy of the drawing. 401ZL002 is the master lines loft, but it was on vellum, it was paper. And I called on one of my old friends, that's still working at Lockheed, is the absolute CATIA guru of the world, three-dimensional stuff. He took a photograph of that, imported it into CATIA, made a 3D model, and another company that wanted to help us is a company called DCU Models. They build the full-scale mock-ups of F-35 for Lockheed. And we told them about this project, and they said, if you bring us a CAD model, we'll make you a mold. That was an NC cut mold of the YF, nice skinny nose.
What does NC mean?
Numerically controlled milling.
Oh, okay.
So they made that mold. Now we've got a guy in the orange shirt there, Butch Sickles, who retired from the General Dynamics fiberglass mock-up shop. He took the mold home and made us a new pointy YF-16 nose. We made it in the top and bottom half so we could fit it up on the bulkhead. This actually includes the avionics bay, because the lab had cut up the avionics bay kind of badly and we had to work around that. So we just took it all the way back to the bulkhead at the front of the cockpit. We're doing it in fiberglass, and it's all one piece, and we scribed in some fake panel lines. It looks like it would open, but it really doesn't. In the course of scraping all of this stuff off, we found all the original markings. And then I call this aviation archaeology. Before we get rid of all this, we went through and measured everything, and I've got a whole notebook full of, when we start repainting it, here's how big things are, here's how big the stars and bars are, how big the USAF is, what angle it goes on there. But that's the original paint job.
Were the markings correct to what they should have been? Like, did they follow the regulations?
No, there's an interesting thing. For this size airplane, this should have been a 20-inch star and bar. And our staff artist, Bob Cunningham, the guy that invented the red, white, blue paint job, Harry Hilliker said, we want the airplane to look small. So they went up to F4 size stars and bars. Bigger stars and bars make the airplane look smaller.
That's funny.
So they're not, yes, they're not exact. I mean, they're within the range of things that are called out in the TO, but normally this airplane would have had smaller ones like go on an F5.
So when it's done, it will be correctly incorrect.
It will match what it was in 1975. More of that, finding how big, these were 12 inches high and 2 inches there, so we know what stroke. And if anybody wants to know, it's called Amarillo font. There actually is a standard Air Force font for that. So then, because we had so much of this and so many layers of paint, there's about 6 layers of paint total. We had a guy volunteer to his services at a reasonable price to come in and media blast it, not sandblast, because we just want to take the paint off, not the metal. And he came in and did that all in a couple of days and got it back to bare metal. After we made sure we knew where all the markings go back on. And there's really enough model airplane guys out there that have documented this out the wazoo, so we know we can get the markings back in the right places. So that was all cleaned up to bare metal. Vertical tail we sanded by hand because this center section is carbon fiber, and I didn't want to take a chance on damaging that with the blasting. So that was done by hand, and you can see General Dynamics F-16. And we've taken dimensions off that.
How long did that take? Just out of curiosity, how long did that take?
At sanding, several weeks. There's also some things, when we got the airplane, it had an ALR-69 set of antennas on the tip, which is production. It's aft-looking threat warning antennas. The prototype really just had a plain tip, so we've made a new one out of fiberglass that just replaces it, and there'll be one tip light. The airplane didn't even have navigation lights. It was a day VFR only airplane. Once again, lightweight fighter, didn't have anything except one strobe light so the chase plane could find it, because it was hard to find out on the range. So this is all done. These are actually unique. The way the vertical tail attaches to the YF-16 is unique to the YF-16. The production ones look more like the wing fittings with bolts that go vertically. These bolts go horizontally. So it's a one-off thing. And Butch is making me this piece that closes out the tail. Once again, my old friends that are still employed by GD came up with the three-dimensional CAD layout of that little tail closeout. It's good to know people. Somebody asked about fixing the chin where it landed on his chin. The trick of that is it's a compound curve. The curvature goes both ways. Luckily, Jim Duarte here, when he's not helping me with airplanes, he likes to rebuild custom cars or old classic cars. And he's got this little toolbox full of funny hammers and anvils and things. And he just did his little elf thing of hammering and bending aluminum. The other guy with him there, Don Crowley, spent 35 years in the factory assembling F-16s. So between the two of them, we've gotten all that patched up with new sheet metal. Try to minimize how much Bondo you put on an airplane. We're trying to make the sheet metal fit right. And then we took it up to painting. Cowtown Aircrafters is a professional aircraft restoration shop, but they're 30 miles north of us. They offered to do the paint work for free, and PPG Aerospace Paints has given us $10,000 worth of aerospace grade epoxy primer and urethane top coat paint. And Cowtown, instead of painting it out on the ramp in the dust and the fresh air, they volunteered to do this. Now the trick was, we got a trucking company to come loan us their truck. I had to steer this up here. The landing gear on an F-16 is 100 inches wide, and that truck is 102 inches. It was a little nervous. So a little filling and sanding, cleaning it up a little bit. The little elves up there at Cowtown Aircrafters, Jerry Asher is the main instigator up there. Smoothing up after the blasting was done, including crawling up the inlet duct. You can see those holes I showed you earlier now have sheet metal patches in them. There is a little bit of epoxy sealant around the, we weren't worried about making things exactly watertight, but we wanted to make it smooth after painting. You can see the sheet metal work on the chin has been cleaned up. Ben has found me the correct UHF antenna that hangs out of that place, the comm antenna. The internet is a wonderful place to go shop. So everything's been cleaned up and filled and faired. Shoot it with primer paint. This is a chromated epoxy primer paint. This is aircraft grade work. We're not just throwing spray can stuff at it. We're making it pretty and durable. Canopy. Once again, PPG Aerospace also owns what used to be Techstar Plastics in Grand Prairie, Texas, and they volunteered that they would make us a new canopy. The original one had been sprayed with copper spray paint to make it metallized so they didn't have to worry about the cockpit so much. Also, if you're familiar with F-16 canopy, there's a bird stripe requirement. Production F-16 canopy is 3/4 of an inch thick, so a 4-pound bird at 350 knots will not come through the polycarbonate. This one was only half that thick because they didn't worry about the bird test for the prototype. We sent the whole canopy frame over to them. We took the sheet metal off the frame here. You can see the frame. We're still fighting with some of the latching mechanism, but it's just been used and abused. This is what they're doing. They took the original glass once it was off, and they made a fiberglass mold around the edges that pick up where all the screw holes are. So when they make the new plexiglass or polycarbonate, they'll take this mask and put it on there and back drill the holes so we can put it back on the frame. The cockpit was, all the instruments were removed, the wiring was removed, but the panel is still there. And the side panels are the regular Zeus fasteners. So we've got enough pictures of what goes in there. We've got a lot of instruments. You know, we're going to repopulate the instrument panel. And we've got an Escapac ejection seat is what goes in this airplane. The seat rails were there. So before we put the canopy back on, we'll put the seat in. But the good thing is we're getting a new canopy. The bad thing is now that we have a new canopy, we have to clean the cockpit. Make it look good because people will be able to see.
Do you put anything in your canopies to shade the sun? You get a lot of sun down there. Do you, I mean, you don't paint the canopy, you don't put a...
If we had not gotten a new canopy from these folks, we would have painted it.
Gotcha.
Since it's going to be brand new plexiglass and clear, the idea is to get this airplane indoors. Keep it out of the sun. That's our long-term goal for this. The airplane is currently got its first coat of gloss white paint on it. That's when it hit 100 degrees. It's supposed to get its second coat this week, so it had about a 1-month break time, and we just couldn't stand to be in the paint shop. It was so hot. They're doing that, got everything fitted up. Doing things like that's the emergency canopy jettison for the ground. It's supposed to be yellow, got painted yellow. And we put the nose on, it fits, everything bolts up, all the scoops and things fit in. You can see what I was talking about, we strived in the lines. That's one of the AOA probes on the side of the nose. We're going to put a standard pitot probe on the front. The 6-foot flight test probe with little dangly bits would be poking people in the eye danger. Now the pitot probe unbolts, so we may have a flight test probe that we put on for show days and take it off the rest of the time so nobody pokes himself. So where are we? Well, we saved a historic airplane from going to the target range. And a lot of people just come out of the woodwork, both with time and money and supplies and paint and landing gear parts, and people want to see this airplane return to its glory. It's standing on its own landing gear. We're going back to the 1975 paint shop or paint scheme, and we have started the capital fundraising to build the facility to put it in. It'll near term, when we bring it back, it's probably going to go in one of the igloos. We've got those cloth, keep it out of the sun and out of the rain and everything. So we want to take care of this airplane. I only want to do this once. I don't have a second restoration in me.
You have an estimate of the cost yet?
We're asking 40 for the new structure.
I mean, for the new
Can I
tent.
ask you
Yeah.
how much we've spent?
No, yeah, the total cost.
Oh, any thoughts for?
Rough ballpark.
I don't
Not-
think we've quantified the donated materials.
Yeah, it would be hard to say. I mean, actual things we paid out of pocket, only maybe $5,000 or $6,000.
Wow.
For the blasting and the
Very
things.
impressive.
I said, people have been showing up. PPG gave me $10,000 worth of paint. Now, that's by a conservative estimate. I've got 20 gallons of aerospace grade paint over there. And I know that stuff is $400 a gallon. Yeah. People have been helping us. There's a company that does the aircraft nuts and bolts and hardware, and they keep finding me bags of things I need, screws and certain things. There's some trick screws on this airplane on the access panels, those quick release screws and things, and somehow they keep finding me things. Somebody mentioned the F4. There's a famous picture of the F-16 and F4 doing a turn, and that actually became the official program logo. If you go back and look at some of the 1975 air shows, you'll see this logo on the back of the blue jumpsuits for the ground crew.